One of the interesting things we look at in economics is seeing how economies are different from each other. Many of our questions and many of the things we wonder about in the world really boil down to this issue of why is this country this way and another country is a different way. We can, for the most part, bring this all down to this idea about how economies answer these three questions of economics. Now, of course, these are philosophical questions. They're not questions that anyone actually sits down and answers on a day-to-day basis. And for the most part, the questions are already answered for a certain economy. But it's the answers to these three questions that can help determine or help us clarify how two countries might be different from each other. In all this, of course, the way they answer them differently is, again, based on our foundation that they have a certain amount of scarce resources, and they don't have enough resources to produce everything it is that they would want to produce. So the first question is, what shall we produce? Obviously, this is going to be very dependent on what resources and how many resources a given country has. So, a large country like South Africa, where we live, obviously is going to be able to produce many different things and have a lot more answers to this question than a much smaller place like Swaziland. That's not saying anything about Swaziland, but South Africa clearly is much bigger and will have many more people, much more land, access to water, all those sorts of things that you need to produce a given product. Neither of these two countries, though, is going to be very good at producing ski tourism. There's not a lot of snow in either one of these places, so if one of these places decided that they want to be the next skiing capital of the world, well, that's probably a bad choice. So this question, again, typically is answered by the resources that a certain country has at its disposal. The second question is, how shall we produce? And this isn't really asking about the specific methodology in making a specific good. Instead, it's talking about who is going to control the resources a country has at its disposal. At one end, we have what's called a command or control economy. And in this, the government is going to control the resources and is going to choose, in the extreme version, they're going to choose every little thing that happens with those scarce resources. People, natural resources, anything like that. At the far other end would be a free market where the people who own the resource, individuals and maybe a business, they're going to make all the decisions about how that resource is used. So again, as an individual, I can choose what I want to do with my day. I can teach, I can make videos, I can go do things, go play golf or something like that. Anyway, as an individual, I'm able to control what I want to do with my resource of time. Well, as far as an economic system goes, the more a government chooses to control parts of the economy, the further they are going to be this way. So a government like North Korea makes many choices about what to do with its resources and what not to do with its resources. China would have been further to the left 15 or 20 years ago, but they've been moving further and further to the right, where they have more and more individual or business control of resources. There's probably a bigger gap in between these two than I have shown, but some countries like Canada, they let the government control a few things that Switzerland might not. So the government might have more control over schools, the government might have more control over healthcare, the government might have more control over, providing food and things like that to people who need it. Anyway, this isn't supposed to be any sort of definitive list. It's just getting to the idea that Canada and Switzerland, the government has less control of its resources and the individuals have more. The last question is, for whom shall we produce? It's easy to confuse these two, so pay careful attention here. This is about how the production actually occurs. Who owns the land? Who owns the resources? This is about what's produced after the fact. So you can think of it as money if you want to, or you could think of it as the actual goods and things that are produced. When we talk about this, many countries are very different in their opinion about how wealth should be redistributed. Should the wealth belong wholly to the person who made it? That would be somebody who was very far to the free market side. Or should some of that wealth be redistributed to people who don't make as much money? And that would be more to the socialist side. Now that's a different term that I put up here because socialism is something that can be, freely voted for by people, not necessarily enforced by the government, although it can happen that way too, of course. So if taxes are high and government services are going to the lower end of the income scale, if that's happening, there's a lot of redistribution of wealth that's happening there. These two are fairly close together. They're not so different. I could have gone, the United States on one end perhaps, and Sweden on the other end. These two are pretty close, but France does have higher taxes and does pay for more services than, say, Germany does. If you have any questions or comments, go ahead and leave them below.